We've got the engine swapped Corolla back in the garage, and today's an exciting one. We are finally building a turbo kit for the 2RZ. We have already put a built engine in the Corolla, we've got full standalone engine management, and today we're going to be throwing some boost at it. We've got this GT3583 turbo, some stainless angles, stainless T3 4-barrel collector, and I went ahead and bought some stainless pipe so that we can make a completely stainless, completely TIG welded, tubular manifold. It should flow a ton better than the log style manifold, and I'm really excited to finally get a turbo on this thing. We've got a ton of work ahead of ourselves, so I'm gonna jump straight into it. All right, it's been a couple hours of cutting, tacking. I cut some pie cuts. I cut some large pie cuts, just some long straights with some angles. I cut some of the 90s into like 45s and even some like 22.5s and smaller. Pretty much, if I needed an angle, I cut it, used the adverse if I needed to, and I think we've got this thing tacked up in a good way. Look at that. So this is actually going to clear everything over here and dump the exhaust right where it needs to be. Got plenty of room for the compressor housing. The exhaust should have a solid route out the back, and it's looking decent. All in all, considering I've never ever built a turbo manifold, a tubular turbo manifold, I'm pretty stoked with the way it turned out. It's not exactly equal length to all the runners, but I did try. I read online that you want to put them in order. So like a firing order of this is 1, 3, 4, 2. So it's circular order, and I guess that helps with scavenging. I'm not exactly sure. Not sure if that's even going to help with anything, considering the lengths of the runners are so different. I was hoping I could do something that was going to be kind of nice looking and also put the turbo in a place that made sense. And I think I've accomplished those goals. So I threw a few more tacks on there so that it could comfortably support the weight of the turbo. And I think this is going to be awesome. We're going to need to clock the turbo in a way that we can get to an intercooler up front. But the turbo location, we should have plenty of room for an air filter. That's important. And then we have plenty of room back here to get an exhaust routed out and through the entirety of the engine bay, down and under the car. That's awesome. I plan on putting the wastegate dump here, so I'm going to have the wastegate off of here and then have the wastegate dump sent straight to the ground. We're going to do wastegate to atmosphere. Everything's coming together pretty good. This is turning into being a real sweet car in my opinion. I'm honestly so freaking excited, and we have plenty of room to go bigger turbo even, which is honestly, that's awesome for me. I'm excited. This thing is going to be 500 wheel horsepower. It's going to be 500 wheel horsepower, and I'm going to have built every single thing along the way, from the engine to the wiring to the turbo kit. It's going to be fabbed by me. Now that we've got everything mocked up, we've got turbo where it's going to live, we know where things are going. I'm waiting for a back purge setup so I can back purge the exhaust manifold when I am welding it to help just all the welds and everything stay as strong as possible. Since I'm waiting for that, we're going to start working on getting the turbo drain and feed lines to the turbo. So we're going to have coolant and oil drain and feeds, and we're going to start with the oil drain and feed lines. The feed line is going to come from the sandwich plate, from the oil filter. It's going to come around and feed into the top of the turbo. The drain line has to come out of the bottom of the turbo and go to the oil pan. So I could go straight to the oil pan itself and weld a bung onto the pan, and I've done that in the past, but I want to try something new this time for a couple different reasons. I think I'm going to try and go into the timing cover. For starters, the timing cover is aluminum, and welding aluminum for me, I enjoy it. And also, it's a thick aluminum, so I'm going to be less likely to warp it or cause any possible issues with cracking that would lead to an oil leak out of the drain. 2, it is a more direct route than going to the oil pan. So it's going to be pretty much a straight little sweeping curve right into the timing cover. And finally, the level of oil is never going to be that high on the timing cover, so there's never going to be anything pushing back on the oil drain that could possibly cause oil to fill up the drain tube and start burning oil through the turbo. So with all those things in mind, I'm going to try putting it in the timing cover, and I think that's going to be best for this application. But we're also going to be pulling the oil pan off of this engine. Since we're going to have the engine out, I'm going to pull the oil pan off. We're going to redo the oil pan. We're going to redo the oil pickup tube. We're going to redo some baffling. We're not going to completely rebuild the oil pan because this is about as confined in space as I can get it. But I am going to move the pickup tube and add some baffling as to hopefully prevent oil slosh from starving this engine of any oil. And I might go ahead and just take a peek-see at any of the bearings in there just to make sure everything is still looking good since we'll have the pan off. But that's something that needs addressed. So we've got a ton of work ahead of ourselves. We're going to be pulling this engine. We're going to be rerouting the wiring harness after we pull the engine. So all of the wiring that's currently going over is going to go under and tuck into the manifold. We're also going to clearance this manifold just a hair more for this brake booster because they're currently practically touching. The first thing I got to do is unfortunately pull this engine. Pulling this engine is kind of a pain. It's actually a big pain. And a lot of the reason it's a pain is because I built the oil pan just barely too big to fit around the sway bar. So I pulled the entire front suspension last time I did this to help get it out of the way of the sway bar. This time I don't think I'm going to do that. This time I think I'm going to go ahead and just pull the transmission down and out, get the transmission off of the back of the engine, which should hopefully give me enough room to pull this engine up and out of the bay without too much issue. Sometimes you build things in a way that makes them a little bit of a pain to work on, and unfortunately I did that with the Corolla. So I better get to work so we can get this thing pulled apart and start fixing some of these issues. All right, and we got the engine out. We officially created a shell, a roller, a useless car. We drove a car into the garage that won't drive anymore. Been doing that a lot lately. Pretty nervously excited to see what this oil looks like. If it's all metal flaky and garbage beyond just like normal break-in like glitter, we got a problem. But it's okay, we're fixing the oil pan regardless, so even if we do have a problem, we can probably pull the things apart, put bearings on it, and get it back together. So here is the moment of truth. Let's get a rag so we can see what things look like, and doesn't look terrible. Don't see any metal flake on this. It's always good. Nothing looks terrible. Does not look like there's big metal flake. That's important. Big metal flake is exactly what we're trying to avoid. So if it just has a little bit of glitter in it, that's super normal for break-in. Long as there is no major chunks, we'll be good to go. It's looking like there's no major chunks. So that means we can get this oil pan pulled off. After we get the oil pan pulled off, we can get the pickup tube pulled off. We can start figuring out what we're going to do for new oil pan pickup tube. Or actually, the oil pan is going to stay the same. We're going to change the pickup tube and add baffling. Yeah, we're going to do some things to try and get this oil pan as good as possible with what we've got. So get this thing drained out. Check it again. Don't see any flake. I definitely overfilled this engine. There's a ton of oil coming out. And, well, got a ton of work ahead of ourselves. We're going to be pulling the entire front timing cover off, which means water pump, alternator, oil pump, all that's got to come off. Oh, things I was not looking forward to doing and didn't really want to do, but if we're doing this turbo kit and we're doing it right, we're going to have to do. So, ain't much to it but to do it. I'm going to let this thing drain and continue taking things apart. All right.
Start it up.
And just like that, we've got the entire engine disassembled as far as we need to disassemble it. Got the oil pan off. I even went ahead and pulled a rod bearing just to double check how things looked. It looked good, looked great. Alleviate a bit of stress for what I'm feeling right now. I can always retorque that. That's not a big deal. But if it was chewed up, I'd want to replace all of the bearings immediately, drop the crank, get everything cleaned up. But it's looking good. There were a couple small flakes of metal in the pan. I'm not sure if you can see them or where they're at. There were a couple small flakes in here. I'm assuming that's just from the old engine, because the old engine did eat those bearings pretty bad. Cleaned the pan out the best I could, but now it's been run. We'll clean it out one more time, get that as spotless as could be, and then we're gonna pull our mock-up engine back out from the depths and throw this on there. Pickup tube currently sits right about there in the oil pan. I'm going to move it, and I'm going to try and get it around here in the oil pan instead of around here. So it's going to go from about there. I'm going to spin it. I'm going to try and get it as far back as possible and maybe even add some length to it. After we get the pickup tube moved to, like I said, hopefully around there, we're going to go through and we're going to add some baffling. Currently, when you accelerate really hard, all of the oil leaves where it needs to be. Yeah, so the oil pickup sits here. So going that way was fine. The oil was all going this way. That was causing some issues. I don't know exactly what we're going to do yet. I am not a fluid engineer. I don't know exactly how would be best for this. And man, starting to stress about how I'm going to do that. But it is what it is. We're going to get that taken care of. We're also going to clean up the front cover real well, and we're going to be welding on the oil return bung right there, straight into the oil cavity. Should be good to go. Hopefully that'll be easy enough. It is pretty thin right there, so as long as we don't blow it out, we'll clean it up real good, make it as absolutely spotless as possible, and then get that TIG welded on there. That'll give us a turbo drain back into the sump, and then if we can fix this sump issue and get our oil pressure issue resolved, we'll actually be able to thrash the Corolla, which would be awesome because currently I'm scared to drive it. All right, it's time to drill a hole and weld a bung into the timing cover for a turbo drain. So we've got an all aluminum weld-in bung here, and I'm going to be putting it right there. So the turbo sits fairly high where I have it mounted, and this is downhill from the turbo. It's a good drain spot, and it's got nothing on the backside. Although the oil might pool here, in here, it looks like. Not too worried about it. We've got clear path straight back into the sump of the oil pan. It's going to be dumping right here. There's nothing really in the way. It's not even going to be dumping straight onto the timing chain. So I think we're going to be good to go. Since we're going to be good to go, I'm going to drill a hole in this. It's pretty nerve-wracking because if I mess this up, this timing cover is milled with that block, and so I can't really replace it without taking the head off, taking the block back to the machine shop, getting my spare timing cover, and having them mill it to the same height as this, like I did with this one. So don't mess up, no pressure, you know, things like that. And let's get a -10 bung welded onto the timing cover. That'll be a turbo drain, then we can start cleaning things up and move on to the oil pan. That's a whole nother stress that I've got. Today is a day full of stressful things that I need to fix in order to get this engine, well, usable. All right, and we got the drain onto the timing cover. Looks pretty good. Is kind of a pain to get around this side just because it was close to this mount bolt, but we got everything on there. It seems to be sealed up nice and well. And now we're moving on to this oil pan and pickup tube issues. The pickup tube is currently over at an angle to the hard driver side of the truck or the car. And I think that is why when I take turns to the left and all the oil sloshes to the right, we're getting some air into the pickup tube and losing oil pressure. So what I'm gonna start by doing is I'm actually going to cut this off and rotate it back. So it's gonna sit probably about there. Probably gonna have to angle things a little bit. This is gonna be a pain. We're gonna pretty much be completely rebuilding this pickup tube. I'm not super looking forward to it, but it's gonna be better and it needs done. We got a little bit of work ahead of ourselves, but we're gonna put the baffle or the pickup tube further towards the back. We're gonna add some more baffling in here. I almost wanna just add a trapdoor baffle here that would cause the oil to get stuck there, but I don't know if that's gonna be the best move. So I'm gonna start by rotating this, putting it towards the back of the pan, because on hard acceleration, we also have an issue with oil starvation. It's pretty unideal, actually. So we got to figure this out, get it sorted, and get this pan usable so we can actually use the car, because this car is designed to get thrashed, to get used hard, and currently we can't do that. So I went ahead and I moved the pickup tube and I centered it and moved it back in the engine. And I need to make sure we've got proper clearance. So I went ahead and I've got these caramel-filled chocolates from Costco. And I'm going to set it up here because I don't have modeling clay. And it'll crush with not too much force at all. I'm going to set the pan on, see if it crushes, and measure how much clearance we've got between the pan and the pickup tube. I don't have modeling clay and I don't want to drive 30 minutes for modeling clay. So this is what we're doing for now. It should give us at least a decent idea. Let's see. Are we? Make sure the pan's pushed down. Okay, it looks like we got a little bit of contact. I went ahead and I wrapped it in paper towel so I can eat the chocolate when I'm done. Okay, we got a little bit of smush. A little bit of smush. All right, now where's my tape measure? We can measure this smush. We're at just a ½ inch. We're at exactly a ½ inch with that. So that gives us enough clearance that I'm not worried about the engine cavitating with sucking too much oil up and sucking air up. And got chocolate out of it. We got the pickup tube completely welded out. Super solid, good to go. It moved back and centered so that hopefully turning it's not so bad. And then we had to move this baffle, and I added these baffles just so that there wasn't quite so much slosh in there. I'm gonna now clean everything out, clean the mating surface up, clean the mating surface on the block up, clean the timing cover up, and we can finally start putting this darn engine back together. So now we've got a hopefully fixed oil pan pickup tube. We've got a bung for the turbo return, and we can start getting the turbo manifold welded out. This has been a very extensive turbo kit, but we're also fixing the engine, so it's actually a useful turbo kit. So I'm going to start cleaning things up and get things ready to start putting this engine back together.
This is lit.
All right, so we went ahead, we got the front cover back on, we got it torqued down, we got the rod bearing that we had checked back torqued down, we got the pickup tube back on there and sealed up, we threw the oil pan on, got it completely sealed up, and this thing should be ready to drop back into the car. Once we get this back in the car, we can get the trans back in the car. We got the trans cross member painted, finally, looking good. Got a nice solid coat of paint on it. I went thick everywhere because this is, you know, seeing all the abuse. So slowly but surely we're getting this thing wrapped up, getting some things done, and I'm excited to get this thing back together and see how this oil pan does. I'd love if we didn't have oil pressure issues when we get this thing back together. I'd love to be able to rip it, do donuts in it, thrash it, and not worry about knocking my freshly built engine. It's pretty important. We got the engine in the car, we've got it on the motor mounts. Really stoked about this because now we can start putting things back together. One of the things we need to modify before finishing putting it back together though is, you can see here, there was some rubbing of the intake manifold on the brake master cylinder. So when I originally clearanced this intake manifold, I clearanced it for the 3RZ, which is 3/4 of an inch taller, and actually it's been rubbing on the brake master. So we're gonna go ahead and clearance that just like we did the other two runners that the brake master rubs on, and gave us just enough room. So, all right, we got the transmission in, we got the drive shaft in, got the bell housing bolts tight, we got the motor mounts tight, trans mounts tight. Everything should be good to go. So we're gonna drop this thing back onto the ground so we can actually work on top a little bit easier, just because right now it's a hair too tall to comfortably work from the top. Get this thing dropped back down and start putting the engine back together. We've got the manifold here sitting on the shelf. We've got the TIG welder set up. I went ahead and set up my dual regulator so I can back purge this exhaust. We're gonna start cutting this thing off one by one. Each individual runner is going to get removed. So we're gonna pop off, say, runner 4, pull it off the manifold, pull it off of the collector, weld the joints, let it do its shrinking and contorting off of the manifold, then put it back on, make any slight trims we might need to get it to fit upright, and then tack it back on, holding it in place. Then we'll move to 2. Do the same thing. Cut the tack on the collector, cut the tack on the manifold flange, weld the joints, and then tack it back in place. We will do that with all 4 individually, and then after we get all 4 runners welded and then re-tacked on, we will then slowly weld the entire manifold. And I say slowly because I don't want to have any horrible warpage of this flange. We got the manifold and a turbo mocked up on a spare engine I've got just to see how things look, and I'm loving it. These clearances are nice and tight. Everything's real close to itself. Nothing's touching. Very pleased with this thing, especially having never worked with stainless before. And this LC Engineering flange welded beautifully, and I am super stoked. I want to give a huge shout out to Max Speeding Rods. They sent this turbo out, which is an absolute unit. It's got a billet compressor wheel. I'm really excited to throw some boost through this thing. And if you are looking for turbos, turbo accessories, suspension components, pretty much anything you need to modify your car, head over to maxspeedingrods.com and use my code REDLINE at checkout for 10% off your entire order. Supporting the companies that support me means the world to me. It helps me get more sponsors. It helps me get bigger and badder projects built like the Corolla. And I'm just stoked for all the support. So now back to getting this turbo kit onto the Corolla. Now we're gonna set the turbo on here and start figuring out how things line up. We've got the turbo drain here welded into the front cover that should be at a good angle to get oil out of the turbo. So now all we got left is to start running some lines. I should have all the fittings to get feed and drain from the turbo for coolant and water. Ordered those all early this week. As long as those are all the right fittings, because you know how ordering fittings is, sometimes it just doesn't work out, we should be good to go. So I'm gonna throw the turbo in there and start running some plumbing for it, I guess. Got it sitting on here. Looks pretty darn good if I do say so myself. It is very in your face when you open the car. That's a good feeling. We got tons of room back here to get a 3-inch exhaust routed through there and hopefully away from the brake lines. We can run it back close to this exhaust. That shouldn't be an issue. I'll try really hard not to heat soak the oil filter, and I do have a wire down there that is going to the oil pressure sensor. We can always move that sensor if we really need to, reroute some wiring, but got a 3-inch adapter for the back of the turbo so we can make ourselves a 3-inch downpipe. And the coolant feeds were both the right size. The oil drain is the right size, so I've got that on there. But the feed line I got is actually wrong. The one thing I can do is I'm gonna pop this grill off and we're gonna see about fitting up our intercooler. This is just kind of a budget-friendly intercooler. One day I will probably end up upgrading it, but for now, it'll work out. It'll work out good. We've only got a 2.5-inch throttle body and a 2.5-inch outlet on the turbo, so we shouldn't even have to run any adapters for the intercooler piping. We also have a ton of intercooler piping to start routing that, but I'm gonna see how the intercooler itself fits up before I start getting ahead of myself with the plumbing. I can't decide if I am losing both my horns and running it upright, or, that sounds great. If I wanna cut the holes lower, do something like that. Either way, that front valence that I just scratched has got to go. It's got to get pulled off so we can get this intercooler fit in there. Unfortunately, luckily it's a removable part with just some 10 millimeters, it looks like. Don't know how much of the lower valence it attaches to though. And I do kind of like the lower valence. I think they are one piece, it feels like. It's not like the lower valence is really seen with the front bumper. I don't know. Don't know yet. Cutting it wouldn't be terrible, but if I weld it, I'll have to like paint it. I could draw out the spot welds maybe, because you can see where the two pieces are welded together. If it's spot welds, I could draw out spot welds and put bolts there. We'll see. I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. All right, so we've got the little valence pulled off. It's over there. Unfortunately, it was one solid piece, and it wasn't just welded in the center. It's welded on both sides as well. So now that that's out of the way, we went ahead, whipped up some mounts for the intercooler. This thing's nice and solid, not going anywhere. These things don't weigh much, and these mounts will be plenty strong enough to hold it. Now I'm gonna have to start doing intercooler routing. So I whipped out my box of intercooler stuff, and I don't have any 2.5-inch 90-degree couplers, so ordering a couple of those, like a bunch, because we need a 90 here to go into the engine bay, a 90 here to go into the engine bay, a 90 here to connect to the intercooler, and then possibly a 90 here so we can send a pipe forward, down, and over. So I'm going to order a 4-pack of 2.5-inch 90-degree couplers, and we're also waiting on the turbo feed for this thing. So right now it's clocked all funny, but turbo feed, the one I got, they sent me a brake line fitting instead of a turbo feed fitting. I ordered the inverted flare that goes into a GT3582, and unfortunately, instead of getting that, I got a brake line fitting that adapts brake lines to AN lines, and it wasn't even the proper sized AN line. I ordered for an AN4, got an AN3. Bunch of issues there, so returned that, getting a new one, but the only thing I can really do now that the intercooler is mounted and we need to wait on intercooler piping because I don't have couplers, and I need to wait on starting it because the turbo has no oil feed, and a bunch of other things, we can start working on the exhaust. So I've got a exhaust coupler that will go onto the back of the turbo. This is cut out for 3-inch exhaust, and I've got the exhaust out of the Supra. I would like to use stainless, but I also have dumped a ton of money into this car and really don't want to dump a ton more in. So instead of using stainless, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use not stainless because I have it on hand, so it's practically free, and instead of spending $150 on some stainless tubing. Now that we've got a turbo, aka muffler, on the engine, because a turbo is technically, it's going to distort and quiet down the sound a bit. It's not going to be near as raspy or horrible as it was with the straight pipe with no turbo. I'm going to come down with the exhaust, go under the car, and I'm either going to kick it out in front of the front door or behind the front door. I'm going to try really hard to avoid kicking it out in the front door so that if I do have passengers or anything, there isn't hot exhaust blowing right on them. If I could get it behind, that would be kind of nice, but it's real tight under the car. So I am also thinking about just sending the exhaust out like right here, which might not be the most ideal, might be a little loud, but really I'm just trying to get the exhaust out of the engine bay, and it's taking everything in me not just cut a hole in the hood and send a 90 straight up and out the hood. I'm gonna go ahead, start getting this exhaust figured out, and then we might be at a standstill till next week. So not sure we're gonna get to start it in this video. We might just be getting as much work done as possible. We might have to save the starting it till next week. Now we have the entire manifold done except for, oh, the wastegate. Almost forgot. Wastegate is also not going to be in until next week. So definitely not starting it until next week because I'll have to pull the manifold off, install the wastegate, figure out wastegate plumbing, get the intercooler plumbed, get the exhaust on. Got a ton to do, but we're gonna get as much as we can done on this thing today. And then it's already gonna be a day late for my video because today is usually the day I upload videos, on Saturday morning. And it's currently Saturday afternoon. So this week's video did not go as smooth as I thought it was gonna go. I ended up spending hours and hours welding that, hours fitting it up, and it's just taken time to do everything. Hours to get this intercooler mounted, especially because I wanted it mounted in a way that kind of kept it out of the way. Also, not sure how I feel about the intercooler mounting because if you look at it from straight up front, you can't really see the intercooler, which means air is not going to flow over the intercooler super well. Yep, that's about where I'm at. I'm unsure how I feel about a few things, but I think this will be a decent place for the intercooler for the time being. Worst case scenario, I can pull this front bumper off. I'm also highly debating cutting up the little front valence around the intercooler, but I'm also not sure this is going to be my forever intercooler. Lots of things up in the air right now, but the things I do know is this thing needs an exhaust and that turbo is not going anywhere. That is where the turbo is going to live. I went ahead and put the Corolla up in the air so I could start working on the exhaust. I got some exhaust going down and towards the back of the car. It clears everything pretty good. We got good clearance to the steering, to the firewall, to the exhaust manifold. Everything seems to be working out. It's on the flange that we've got. So for now, it is actually just dumping pretty close up front. It's pointed back, but it is not where it's going to end up dumping. I just wanted to leave it there for now because when I put more exhaust on this thing, when I put more exhaust on this thing, I'm going to put a V-band clamp there so we can take it apart and actually remove the exhaust to make this thing serviceable in case, you know, we need to remove the exhaust. So there's not much else I can do on this thing. Right now we're kind of at a standstill. I need intercooler couplers to get the intercooler wrapped up. I need a turbo feed line to get the turbo wrapped up. I need a V-band to get the exhaust wrapped up. Unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to be able to start this thing in this video. So I think that's going to be it for this video. Next week we will be getting this thing running. We'll hopefully be able to take it for a drive. And soon we're going to have to take this thing and get it tuned and dynoed. So really excited to see where this thing goes. But that's it for now. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. I really hope to catch you on the next one.